it relates to a new team coming into your neighborhood or your area. You already have your loyalties. A new team comes into your area, and maybe they have a connection to one of your team's rivals. How do you take that? How do you handle that news? What if you want to go to those games, but you don't want to be a traitor? So we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Just a couple minutes here before we get to Charlie Boehm. And I want to talk about Freddy Adu. It's hard not to. And look, I know that there is a large portion of the American soccer fan base who'd rather never talk about Freddy Adu. Let's just leave Freddy alone. Let's just forget that Freddy's out there doing his thing or not doing his thing, whatever the case may be. Because, look, we went through the super-duper hype phase of Freddy Adu back in 2004. By the way, the 10-year anniversary of Freddy Adu signing with MLS as a 14-year-old is this year. This year. 10 years it's been since Freddy Adu burst on the scene as a phenom. And it hasn't gone that well since then. DC United, Real Salt Lake, Benfica, bouncing around on loan. Last playing in Brazil. Now in England, trialing at Blackpool. Blackpool went so far as to make little videos about Freddie and about his career and about his hopes and his dreams. And he says, look, I still want to get on the World Cup team. Now, what player wouldn't say that? But they put Freddie out a little bit front and center. Blackpool did. Championship side, Blackpool. Word out today that, Freddie's probably not going to get a contract at Blackpool. Maybe they liked what they saw. They're always nice about these things. It's always, oh, yeah, you know what? He was very good, or we were impressed, but, we just don't need anybody else right now. Well, why'd you bring him on trial then? I like what I have, says the manager. Well, why'd you bring Freddy Adu on trial then? And I'm not going to leap to any conclusions about how Freddie played in training with Blackpool. But it does occur to me that, once again, Freddy Adu is going to be out there, wandering the earth, looking for a contract. It just hasn't. Again, this is on Freddie. I mean, I'm not trying to absolve Freddie of any responsibility in the course of his career. I do think he was ruined very early on by all of the hype surrounding him as he entered MLS as a 14-year-old kid. Who can handle that at 14? In one of these Blackpool videos, he talks about, well, I took the contract because my family was struggling. My mom's working 2 jobs. And hey, I really can't blame him if that's the case. We all know the story about how he could have gone to Italy, to Inter Milan, and joined up there and probably gone through a more traditional development process. Maybe he'd be a different player. But, hindsight is 2020. We're done with that now. He is who he is, Freddy Adu. But why don't we have cameras on Freddy Adu following him around the world as he wanders the earth looking for a contract? Does that mean? Is it mean to say, let's get a reality show? I mean, this is like no reservations with soccer. He shows up at a club, trials for a little while. We get to see him interacting with we get to see, because there's nobody American at least, who's going to have the same kind of gravitational pull as Freddy Adu. Now, clearly that's not based on his career and how good he's been, but it's based on all of that hype and the new Pele and all of the Sierra Mist commercials. They know Freddy Adu in England. He may not have been as big of a name, but they know him. They're aware of the hype. When he goes to Blackpool, don't you think that that's a story? This is why they made videos of him, because he's Freddy Adu. So give me my Freddy Adu documentary or reality series. Freddy Adu going from continent to continent, country to country, club to club, looking for a job at 24 years old. If that's what you believe Freddy Adu to be. I know some of you don't. Some of you out there, the Freddy Adu truthers or birthers or whatever we're going to call them. Which one's better? Freddy Adu's not 24. Freddy Adu is 34. Okay. Sure. There's been no proof of that. But why not? Why believe the line that's out there? Why believe the accepted truth when you can imagine him to be much older? And I guess it adds an interesting wrinkle. Someone's going to write a novel one day, or someone's going to write a movie one day about Freddy Adu's life. It's going to be based on Freddy Adu's life. It may not be directly about him. Maybe they'll have to fictionalize a lot of it. but it'll be interesting because it'll be quite the story. All right. Let's take a break. When we come back, Charlie Boehm from MLSsoccer.com and SoccerWire.com will join us. We'll talk through DC United's current situation, their stadium issues, wider MLS topics. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Here we go. Charlie Boehm from MLSsoccer.com, SoccerWire.com joins us now. This is Charlie's beard is fierce, by the way. Let's just give him a nice round of applause for that thing he's got going on there. That's commitment, my friend. That is good. It's not quite, Duck Dynasty level, but I don't know. Where's your outer limit on the beard?
Well, commitment, it's actually not doing something. So
Sure.
In a sense, this is really just salutary neglect here.
Okay, then that's where we are.
But I'm approaching my cutoff point is the mustache starts to
go
get in
over
your
the lips.
mouth,
Yeah, can't do that. I'm the guy that trims the mustache and lets the rest of it grow. Like, I want to make sure there's no infringement on the mouth hair. Speaking of neglect, may or may not be the case that Washington, D.C. has neglected D.C. United over the years. It's up to your personal opinion whether that's the case. We had this movement, Charlie, and nobody who knows anything about Washington was taking a deal for granted. And despite the fact that Alan Liu was out there trying to work the negotiations, we're going to swap this this government-owned building for the land and help DC United get their stadium built. We were always skeptical, and now we have a roadblock. A mayoral candidate and a councilwoman, Bowser. There you go. Muriel Bowser has come out against the swap. That doesn't mean she's against the stadium being built, but she is against this swap. How big of a deal is this?
This is noteworthy for sure. This is ominous, but not necessarily any kind of deal breaker. Really, what I see it as a shot across the bow. This is the sort of the beginning of the legitimate horse trading, haggling process that always happens in the DC political system with a deal of this magnitude. Because really, and by the way, I tweeted out a link yesterday to a Washington City paper article by Aaron Weiner, who's a general reporter for them, who handles like housing and city politics. It's a must read. The city paper is our alternative weekly in the district. There's a lot of complications and a lot of aspects to this deal. So folks from outside this region who aren't up on that, who are kind of just watching and trying to figure out what's going on here, go read that. Check out my Twitter stream if you need to find it, or go to WashingtonCityPaper.com, I believe it is.
Yeah, the city paper does a good job of covering DC, and for people who might not know, the city paper is the one that got sued by Daniel Snyder. So, if you need some,
of course, but they laid out a pretty good explanation of the land swap.
Okay.
That this deal hinges on, and the main thing to remember is that the city, because they're a little bit extended in terms of their credit because of the enormous outlay for the Washington Nationals baseball stadium, which cost in the neighborhood of $800 million, and almost entirely paid for by the city. They can't just float a bunch of bonds and essentially write a check for their section, their part of the DC United Stadium. So they're doing a land swap with a very valuable piece of government land at 14th and U Streets, which is right at the heart of one of the city's big nightlife districts. And this Bowser's concerns and a lot of other concerns are going to hinge on how much that is actually worth, and how that piece of land is handled, because it's essentially they're giving the city, the plan calls for acreage developers to get a kind of a privileged access to that land in order to do mixed use development. And so that's the easiest target of the many sort of complex angles of this deal. So I think that Bowser, it was just a matter of time before a politician stood up and kind of started to question that. It doesn't help, I guess, from a DC United perspective, that Bowser is running for mayor this year. So, it was inevitable that a mayoral candidate was going to try and use this as a club against the incumbent Vincent Gray, because it's his deal. And so the benefit for United from the way this is all played out is that this is the mayor's deal as much as it is DC United's. He's put his reputation and his political capital on the line for the stadium deal. However, that also makes it a target. So that's a little bit of an angle here. The problem, the main reason that Bowser's opposition is more than just any other mayoral candidate or any other council member's opposition, is that she heads the particular committee on the council that would take up this deal. So if she really wants to stop this from happening, she can enact procedural hurdles that keep it from ever even getting discussed. I don't think she's ready to go to that level yet, but that is always kind of out there as a possibility. And
it's no coincidence that she's running for mayor. I mean, this is a way to set herself out against Vincent Gray on this particular issue. And it's interesting to hear her use those populist, slogans and tropes about how, I'd rather see the money go to schools, which, is debatable whether it's a zero-sum game on that level.
It's interesting she mentioned middle schools by name. I think that's almost guaranteed to be related to the fact that the Washington Post did a pretty big feature story a few days ago about the biggest sort of bump or siphon point in the public school system right now. There's a gentrification, neighborhood overhauls, population growth in the city is leading to a lot of evolution at the elementary school level. And so there's a lot of new families and young families that are comfortable sending their kids to a public elementary school, but then when they get to middle school, they feel like they can't trust those schools the way that they could maybe the younger ages. And so that was focused on and drew a lot of attention among the chattering classes of DC. How can we fix the middle schools? So So that was an interesting timing on her part. But as several people have noted, the problem with the DC public school system, and my wife actually taught in that system for 2 years, it's not necessarily money. They spend a lot of money on that system. There's institutional and cultural issues that make that system underperform. And that's a main reason that DC has a huge chunk of kids in charter schools, probably the biggest charter school population as a percentage of the population in the country.
While all of this is going on, and Ms. Bowser has come out against the land swap and has the potential power to stop the deal from even being addressed by her committee and then later on being taken up by the city council, there's news that there have been hearings about potentially redeveloping the RFK site to put a 100,000 seat domed stadium in for the Washington professional football team. And again, the cynical person, the cynical soccer fan immediately jumps to, well, look how DC United is treated versus how they'll bend over for the Washington football team. Is it that simple?
To some extent, it is, because everybody knows the NFL is the 800-pound gorilla in American sports, and to some extent even in American politics. They generally, NFL owners get what they want. And jurisdictions, city governments and so on will go to great lengths to keep and to please NFL franchises. That is even more so the case in DC. The depth and the passion of the Redskins following transcends state lines, race, class, geography lines. I mean, that is the one thing that almost everybody who's lived here in this area for any amount of time can agree on. Mm-hmm. That said, Daniel Snyder is the owner of the Redskins. The Washington football team, as you said, is already a controversial figure, a very deeply hated figure among the fan base to some extent. So this has been an open secret. This concept of this Danny Dome, as some people have called it, is not a new idea. It's been talked about for actually as long as they've been talking about a DC United stadium. I can remember going to events back in 2005, 2006, where it was brought up. And of course, any politician who brings up the idea of bringing the Redskins back into the city gets a standing ovation.
Right.
So it's sort of, DC public is generally very skeptical of these kind of stadium projects in the aftermath of Nats Park. But the Redskins are a little bit exceptional. Yeah. Even given that, it's still not necessarily guaranteed. I mean, the question would come down to does Daniel Snyder think that the city is going to write him a check or build him a stadium? They're still under lease at FedEx Field, which is, those unfamiliar with the region, FedEx Field is a very much disliked stadium way out at the Beltway in the Maryland suburbs. It's kind of a nightmare to get to and to attend an event there. And it's only a matter of time before the RFK campus hosts some kind of new facility, some kind of new major anchor, because there's a lot of open space there, and the city is devoting a lot of time and resources to sort of beautifying that Anacostia waterfront. So that's out there, and it may actually even figure into an Olympic bid, because the DC wants to bid for, I believe it's a 2028 Olympics or 2026. I can't remember how far down the road it is, but that's sort of out there as well.
That is not a thing I would willingly get on board with. I love the Olympics. I just don't think DC is the place to hold them. All right, while we have you and we have a couple more minutes, Charlie, let's kind of transition into some other MLS topics. DC United, obviously, top of mind for people in our area, but just in terms of getting ready for this season. A couple of moves are happening as we get closer. 12 days left. Austin Berry traded 2012 MLS Rookie of the Year. Austin Berry traded from the Chicago Fire to the Philadelphia Union for allocation money. What do you make of that trade? Does it say anything specific about Berry or about Chicago or the Union at this point? Because they had a couple of defensive options there.
Yeah, it seems to be an old topic in Philly that they don't have enough center back depth. They had Shannon Williams, who's really their first choice right back, playing center back on occasion when injuries necessitated it last season. And I don't think that's the ideal. And even Amobi Okugo, who's a very, very good center back, is a converted midfielder. Mm-hmm. So they'd been searching for some depth and for some other options in the heart of defense. And they're getting a pretty good deal here. Alexi Lalas reported that the deal involved $100,000 in allocation money heading west to Chicago. If so, that's a steal for a pretty talented center back. I think the reason that Chicago felt comfortable enough parting with him is that really the defense as a whole wasn't all that good last year. It wasn't quite good enough to get them in the playoffs. It was less than the sum of its parts at times. I'm intrigued that Barry was the one who got shipped. It's ironic too because that these two teams did a deal for a center back last year, Bakary Soumare, who was coveted by Chicago, a former Fire player. When he came back to the league, the Union got their hands on him first. He really didn't live up to expectations. He had a kind of an uneven year, and so this is a statement of faith in him, I think, to some extent by the Fire, and clearly a sign that Frank Yallop, the new coach there, doesn't have some of the same precepts, I guess, that his predecessor might have. And so Barry made the move. I think you're going to get a lot of upside from him. He's an interesting move for Philly. I think he could end up starting. Right now they've got a kid named Richie Marquez, pretty high up their center back depth chart, who is a rookie out of a D3 program. Very remarkable story. Who's sort of surprised people to come into the picture and to earn the roster spot, at least it appears, ahead of a couple higher draft picks who've already gotten cut. So some interesting options on both sides here, but really in the big picture, this is all about getting Mike Magee some money.
That's what I was getting to. Mike Magee holding out, and players have done this before. It's odd to see how the public receives that. I don't know how Fire fans are taking this right now. I have no problem with Mike Magee trying to leverage an MVP season into a new contract. So we should definitely assume that getting Austin Barry off the books and getting that allocation money back is all about dumping some more money into Mike Magee's coffers.
That's certainly the appearance. Externally, obviously, we know that there's not quite enough transparency for us to speak with a high degree of confidence about those numbers.
Right.
Because they also brought in John Kennedy Hurtado, a fairly expensive center back in the offseason from Seattle. So I don't know if it's necessarily A plus B equals C, but that's the pressure that Chicago feel. Mike Magee is it's an interesting case. I think he's courting a bit of controversy, but personally, I find it hard to argue with this approach on his part. He's done the business for years now. He's the most underpaid player in MLS, and if you're not going to sort of lay out your shingle and make it clear how you feel and what you need at this stage of the season, then you're probably waiting too late. He's got to strike while the iron is hot.
It does,
and I actually think he's doing it in a less controversial way by doing it in preseason and not letting this linger on into the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think if you're going to do this, do it now and hopefully get it done with before the season starts. I mean, this isn't going to follow along with Mike Magee's a great guy and will do anything for Chicago and blah, blah. But hey, again,
Mike Magee's been carrying the water for his clubs for years now. So it's always going to polarize opinion on some level, but I think he realizes this is his moment. This may be his last big contract.
Absolutely. Charlie Boehm, go follow him on Twitter, CBOEHM, SoccerWire, MLSsoccer.com. Thank you for your time as always, Charlie. I appreciate it.
Always a joy. You guys have a great show.
That's a great beard, man. It really is. When we come back, Erik Stover, Chief Operating Officer of the New York Cosmos, will join us. NASL talk. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
On the line with me now, Chief Operating Officer of the New York Cosmos, the reigning Soccer Bowl champions of the NASL, Erik Stover. Hi, Erik. How are you?
Good morning, Jason. Good. How are you?
I'm good as well. I know that we're talking to you ahead of a preseason trip for the Cosmos, headed over to the UAE for some training. Can you explain exactly what the club is getting out of that trip and what we see this happen occasionally. Clubs go to the Middle East or the UAE to train. What does this do for the New York Cosmos?
Well, I think for us, it gets us out of this horrible weather which
There's
we're having in New York. That's first thing. We have a great partner in Emirates Airline. Dubai is an amazing city. I had the privilege of going there a few weeks ago for the first time. It's absolutely incredible. And part of our relationship is to try to push the Cosmos and our partnership around the world as best we can. Emirates invited us over, so we'll be setting up camp at the UAE FA brand new facility that we'll likely be cutting the ribbon on.
Mm-hmm.
So we're set up in dormitories that overlook training pitches, brand new state-of-the-art facility. So we'll be there for 2 weeks, play 3 training matches, and we'll come back fit and ready.
Now, this trip is sort of another bullet in the chamber for people who might say that the Cosmos are a little too big, I suppose. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but certainly they are far ahead of many of the NASL teams that you guys will play against this season. And I know there's no salary cap, and the rules are much different than they would be in MLS. But this is still the United States, where people tend to take parity as sort of a given. Does this worry? Would that worry you? The perception that the Cosmos can go to the UAE while, say, the Railhawks are still waiting to sign enough players to field a team?
Well, we don't. Well, first of all, I don't know that parity is necessarily a given in sports in the United States, and
right.
And I wouldn't subscribe that it's the best way to grow the sport in this country. But having said all that, what we're trying to do is help build not only the Cosmos but the NASL. And if we can develop commercial relationships while on tour, whether it's in Dubai or Sao Paulo or Tokyo, whatever we're doing, and if we can bring those back to the NASL, which we're actively trying to do, then those new commercial deals get spread back around the rest of the league. We can raise the profile of the NASL that way and help the other teams, particularly on the bottom of the pile right now with player spending, have a larger budget and can invest more into their player roster.
So this is a rising the rising tide that the Cosmos are creating will lift all of the boats?
Yeah, I think so. And we take that mission seriously in trying to get commercial deals for the league as a whole, and to spin it off to the rest of the clubs. And we're not the only ones carrying that banner now. I think if you look at what's happening in Indianapolis, they're doing an outstanding job. They're going to outdraw us this year, I would expect. And there's another club doing it well and helping spread the wealth around the league. And I think you'll see more in the future. And Tampa's got a new owner that's investing in the facility and investing in his roster. I think the same can be said in Minnesota. So you could see the influences are starting to spread around the league.
Now, the sort of questions over whether or not the Cosmos, the current incarnation, are outspending the rest of the league in an unfair manner, that's all fairly new. But it obviously brings people back to the idea that the original New York Cosmos, the legacy New York Cosmos of the original NASL, played a role in the death of that league. And I recently read some comments that you made to Dave Martinez of Empire of Soccer, where you contested that a little bit. Is that based on a rereading of history? How do you characterize the Cosmos' role in the death of the original NASL?
Well, I think the real question is, what would the original NASL have been without the New York Cosmos?
It's a fair question.
So I think it's an overly simplified answer that the Cosmos outspent everybody and the league collapsed. I'm not saying it wasn't a factor. It was a variable in the equation. But the big issues were that the league overexpanded, went to the absolute wrong markets, and that was had the effect of pulling down from the bottom instead of pulling up from the top. I think the loss of the World Cup disenfranchised some of the key owners in the league.
Right.
And the biggest thing for me, particularly, my last 10 years in this sport, paying attention to it, was the infrastructure around, whether it's New York City or Los Angeles or small cities in between. The infrastructure, the soccer infrastructure, did not exist. There were not good. There wasn't good coaching. There weren't strong leagues. And just sort of the understanding of the sport. So if there was a dip in popularity or a dip in demand, there wasn't a foundation to support it. You didn't have the soccer facilities that you have around the United States now. So the question of whether it's MLS or NASL, ever overexpanding or the sport not being successful in this country, I think that's all put to rest because the infrastructure is there now, whether it's brick and mortar stadiums or the human infrastructure of, youth soccer.
Certainly the original NASL suffered from sort of a Wild West mentality when it came to expansion. And I think anybody who understands that era of American soccer knows that it was too many clubs too fast with run by people who didn't really have the money to invest in the product. Now the NASL is expanding pretty rapidly right now, Erik, and I wonder, besides that infrastructure element, is there any sense? I mean, we do see some issues. The Virginia Cavalry is not quite there. I know that's a stadium thing, but Oklahoma City may have some. Where do you fall on sort of where NASL is going right now?
Well, we have to expand. You can't have a league of 8 or 10 teams for an extended period of time and be taken very seriously. So expansion is important. I think the commissioner has done a good job of identifying the right markets. Oklahoma City, Northern Virginia are strong markets. They've had hurdles that they have to cross, and I think that's normal in any league that's only 3 years old. I think, having been in MLS, we saw that. It wasn't too long ago where Kansas City was questionable, and now it's an incredible story in MLS. I think you're going to have those potholes you fall into, and you just got to get back out of them and keep going.
Are you aware of the status of those clubs? Is that something that's communicated to you, or is that a league office issue?
I am aware of some issues. I had a meeting with the commissioner last week. All of the challenges that they may be facing are being sorted out. But they're two startup organizations with different owners, and they have to figure out how they're going to work together. And again, that's very normal. My understanding is that those solutions are coming, and I believe firmly, Northern Virginia is the wealthiest part of the United States. It absolutely can support a team, and we've seen in Oklahoma City in particular, that they love their sports, whether it was minor league hockey drawing 8,000 people or what the Thunder are doing right now. They love their sports and they'll support it. So they're good markets, and I think they'll get going in the right direction.
And certainly, I don't want to pay everything. As you already mentioned, Indy 11. That's right now that's a huge success story. They're pushing for their own stadium. They've sold thousands upon thousands of tickets already before they've even played a game. So good things happening in NASL as well. Now, let me ask you about the Cosmos role, and again about the spending and the idea that you may or may not be able to build a 30,000 seat stadium. And I do want to get to that in a second. Is there a sense that the Cosmos are, say this, to be evocative here, the evil empire of maybe NASL or American soccer? And is that a bad thing necessarily?
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing, whether it's the New York Yankees or Notre Dame football, whatever it might be in the United States. Choosing sides, I guess, is important. We don't set out trying to make enemies. What we're trying to do is build a club that our fans can be proud of. And we want to do it in a way that rivals great clubs around the world. We want to have a proper academy. It's important for us to have a New York identity and to work very closely with the community. If that rubs some people the wrong way, or they think we spend too much money, or whatever the issue is, we don't concern ourselves with that. We are focused on our fans, our supporters, and doing what we need to do to build this club. And I think a lot of the stories about what we spend is blown way out of proportion, and it's speculation on top of speculation, because we do know that while we are likely the highest spenders in the NASL, we don't overspend on players. If we value a guy at a certain number, that's what we're willing to pay. Other teams have paid more, and we've let those players go. So we're trying to be sensible in growing this club, and we know that blowing everybody out of the water is not good for the NASL or for us in the long term. I know you
answer this question regularly. I imagine you're very frustrated to have to answer it so often without having any developments on it. But the Belmont Stadium project, where does that stand right now?
Well, we have it. We submitted a bid to an RFP that was open-ended. There was no timeline on it. We feel that we submitted the best bid. There was competition, 3 other competitors that basically wanted to build big box strip malls, which honestly is the last thing that we believe Long Island and Nassau County needs. We like the location. It's literally right on the border of Queens. You've got 3 million people in Long Island, another 2+ million in Queens. So we think it's ideally situated. It generates the most jobs. It generates the most economic impact. But it's a politically sensitive issue. We've gone through election cycles. There's another election cycle coming up. It's on state-controlled land right next to a racetrack, which is being propped up by the state right now. So there are issues that have to be dealt with that are below the surface and are pretty big deals statewide. So we just remain patient. Hopefully we'll be selected the preferred bidder, and we can start negotiating a contract.
Does that mean that and I imagine I've asked you this before when we've had you on the show, does that mean there's no alternative plan in-house? There's no notion?
No, we do have alternative plans. Okay. But this clearly is the best option. Right. There's plenty of acreage near the track. This community, particularly the Belmont community, desperately needs economic impact. It needs jobs. We can provide the most jobs. We can provide the most construction jobs. So for us, it is the clearest, fastest path to success of building a $400 million mixed-use development. There are alternatives in and around New York City, but those are more difficult and would take longer and cost more money.
Certainly, nothing is going to be easy in that area, I imagine. But does the project have to be of a certain scope to match the Cosmos profile? Or would you guys consider a 15,000, 12,000 seat stadium?
That doesn't matter whether it's 15,000 seats or 25,000 seats. The footprint of a stadium is roughly the same.
Okay.
So if you're talking 15 to 20 acres, building a smaller stadium capacity-wise isn't going to change the 15-acre need. So, what we ultimately build, we expect to be around the 25,000 seat that we've shown everybody.
And that's just a matter of the commitment made by the club and the owners of the club to build that on that level. And it actually leads me into a question, and someone on Twitter has put this out there. Are the Cosmos operating at a loss? Because I imagine it's difficult to bring in enough revenue to cover salary when you're playing out at Hofstra.
Yeah, well, the Hofstra challenge is a real one. We have very affordable tickets. It's the cheapest professional sports team event that you could go to in the New York metropolitan area. And it's like any company that's starting up. You price yourself in a way that's affordable for the market to introduce yourself, and then you have to grow. We don't have the commercial operation at Hofstra that we would have in a new stadium. So we're doing fine with our budgets, but over the next few years, we expect to get towards profitability, especially when we cut the ribbon on a new stadium.
Last thing before I let you go, Erik, it just dropped this morning that Freddy Adu won't be offered a contract at Blackpool, and you guys have started, and not to equate Freddy Adu to Danny Sotella directly, but Danny Sotella needed a home. You guys, signed him. He's proven to be a very good player for you. Is Freddy Adu a player that the Cosmos would consider?
I don't think so. I could tell you that we did consider him last year, and we do have some reclamation projects on our roster, and I think that's a good sign for the way Gio and the coaching staff run the sporting department. They can strip past those layers and find the great player that's inside. And we did look at Freddie last year. We had some conversations. But at this point, we're very happy with where our roster is now. And if we make any changes over the summer or any additions over the summer, it probably would not include Freddy Adu.
Okay. Just while we're here, and I know this is probably a question for Gio, but how does the odd split and good on NASL for getting out of the way of the World Cup, but how does the odd split in the spring and fall season affect your team as you build it?
Well, I think it's important for U.S. soccer to ultimately get on the world calendar. And for NASL, the spring-fall split has allowed us to do that partially. So, one thing we can do, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year, but over the break, you can do friendlies. And when I was in MLS, there was a lot of criticism of friendlies taking priority over, regular season matches. So you can do the friendlies in the summer, not impact your regular season, not tire guys out. And it is a good way to market the club, and it's a good way to test yourself against big clubs from around the world. So I think it brings a lot of opportunities. I think it brings opportunities in transfer windows. It's a longer break this year because of the World Cup. In future years, it'll be shorter. So I think the split season concept as we have it now, I think works really well.
You keep bringing up things that I had forgotten. I spoke with Neil Morris, who covers the Railhawks and writes on the NASL down in Carolina, and he mentioned that he got word there was a survey that went out that asked supporters about a season switch. You just mentioned the world calendar, as we'll call it, and in addition to that, a potential change to the playoff format. Are those things that you're aware of and are on board with? How serious would a calendar switch be taken by NASL in the near future?
Well, I think it'll be taken seriously. I think it was smart of the league to reach out to supporters, the people that are passionate behind clubs in all of our markets, and ask what they thought. The competition as we grow has to be reevaluated every year. There was a lot of criticism of MLS over the years. Every year it changed, and nobody knew what was going on. I think that's sort of unavoidable when you're growing. When you go from 8 teams to something less than 16, it's very hard to maintain balance. So the NASL is looking at all those options over the next few years as we grow. How do we adjust? So I think it's smart, again, to ask fans what they think. There's a lot of discussions going on internally, and we'll see where we end up. There's probably not one simple solution to carry us through the next few years.
Chief Operating Officer of the New York Cosmos, Erik Stover, giving us some time this morning. Thank you very much, Erik. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. So there goes Erik Stover. Fascinating stuff. Considered Freddy Adu last year. Probably won't consider him this year. That means if you are one of those people advocating for Freddy Adu to find an NASL landing spot, it's going to have to be somewhere else than New York. It's going to have to be, I don't know, San Antonio. Can they afford him? Can anybody in NASL afford Freddy Adu outside of the New York Cosmos? Because is Freddy Adu going to really take a massive pay cut to go play in the second division? Right now he has no contract. Maybe beggars can't be choosers. And I think we all would be fascinated by Freddy Adu in the NASL, and it would certainly bring some heat to that league. The good kind, I don't know. But certainly would bring some heat to the NASL at this point. We'll see what happens. What kind of options does he have left? He's going to go and try the continent now that England has not worked out. We've got about 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes, until Musa Okwonga joins us to talk Manchester United's failures in the Champions League yesterday, losing to Olympiacos in the away leg of that Champions League tie. So let's get to this question I teased earlier in the show. And this relates to New York, so it's a nice little transition from the Cosmos discussion. This is from Brian. He sent me an email. He says, I have a question for you and other listeners. Can someone be a fan of a team in one league, but be a fan of a different team in a different league that is owned by a rival team's ownership group? You know where this is going. This is something that came up when NYCFC was awarded to Manchester City. Case in point, I'm a Manchester United fan living in New York City. I want to be a fan of NYCFC, but them being owned by Manchester City, am I a traitor? Do other people struggle with this? If you are a Yankees fan and a Liverpool fan, do you stop cheering for Liverpool when the Red Sox ownership group bought them? I'm interested in what people think on it. I don't know how much a ownership group influences fandom. This is the modern world, right? There are sports concerns, sports business concerns. They're not just interested in one team in one sport. They're going to go out. Fenway Sports Group's going to go out and buy Liverpool, and they've got the Red Sox. If you're a Yankees fan and a Liverpool fan, how do you feel about that? As NYC gets closer and closer to starting, by the way, news also from Empire Soccer, who I referenced in that interview with Erik Stover. Empire Soccer has some news on Major League Baseball not being a fan of NYCFC playing at Yankee Stadium. So that's a story worth watching. Go check out Dave Martinez's site. But when it comes to this question, New York City FC is owned by Manchester City. I don't think it should matter. My personal opinion is it shouldn't matter. If you've got local live professional soccer in your neighborhood, if it's easy for you to get to NYCFC games and you love the sport, why wouldn't you go? Who cares? I'm leaving politics out of this question, by the way. Just mucks it up. But if we're going to make it about the ownership, having two teams, two different sports, and there's a conflict there. Well, not two different sports necessarily. In this case, it's the same sport, but have a conflict there. If you have a conflict over ownership, are you rooting for the ownership? Are you supporting the ownership, or are you supporting the team? What's the difference? Where's the separation? The team existed long before that ownership group stood up in Liverpool and Manchester City. Now, in the case of NYCFC, it's a new team. The only ownership group they've ever had is Manchester City's owners. Does this cause a problem? So put this poll out there for Brian. Hit me up on Twitter at SoccerMorning. 347-756-6276 is the phone number if you want to get in on that thought. I'll leave it out there. We'll take calls. We'll take tweets on it. In the meantime, I have another line of thinking here. I came across yet another story, yet another blog post, yet another piece on a website saying that Miami and their new MLS club run by David Beckham is destined for failure. Flat out destined for failure. No equivocation. No, well, maybe if they do this right, or maybe if they put the stadium in this place, and maybe if they market it this way, they'll be, no, flat out. Miami is going to be a failure. Now, not being from Miami and South Florida myself, I'm not going to stand up and say that. Yeah, I know about the history of that city as a sports town, some of it. This author in this particular piece, I'm not referencing it for a reason. It's not worth your read. Brought all of that stuff up. Oh, the Dolphins don't sell out, and the Heat didn't sell out until blah, 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 and the Marlins have nobody going to that stadium. All of those things were used as evidence that an MLS team in Miami would be a failure. And it occurs to me, not only while some of that may be fair or unfair, and I'm not in a position to judge that, it occurs to me that with every piece saying that Miami is going to be a failure in MLS, it actually might be a good thing for the project. It actually might bring that soccer community together. Do you want to be the team? Do you want to be the city where MLS failed twice? Is that who you want to be, Miami? No, of course not. We know about the Southern Legion. Those guys are out front. I know there are other soccer fans in Miami who are excited for this. Every time somebody says you can't do it, because that's who they're talking about. They're talking about you, Miami. They're not. These people are painting with a broad brush. They're blanketing the entire Miami area and saying they're terrible sports fans. It'll never happen. It won't work. They're going to end up with 10,000 people in the stadium every week. That's a direct shot at you, Miami soccer fans. Are you fickle enough that you're going to go for a year and then eventually stop? Will you support your team no matter what? That's the level we're on now. America has a long sports history of fans showing up when their team is good. And we pick out those teams who get the support even when their team isn't good, because those are the true fans. They stick with their team through thick and thin. Doesn't matter. Are we the NFL team? Are we 14-2 this year, or are we 2-14? Cleveland Browns fans, as far as I know, show up no matter what. 2-14, they're there. That's what they look at most often. 2-14, 6-10, 4-12. Those are the records that the Browns have, and yet they get people in that building. They even got their team back after it was stolen from them because they have that reputation. Doesn't matter how bad their team is. They show up. And that's the test for Miami. It's a test for every sports fan, for every city. It's going to be the test in Atlanta. Some MLS teams don't pass that test right now for a lot of reasons. And we call them out. We go, hey, FC Dallas doesn't have anybody in the stands. It's terrible attendance. There's only 20,000 seats in that building, and you can't fill them up. Doesn't matter how good you are. You should be going to that stadium to support that team if you care about the sport, if you care about that club. So every time somebody says Miami can't work in MLS, Miami's destined to fail in MLS, David Beckham's going to run away with his tail between his legs, should take that as more motivation to get it right this time. It should be more motivation. Keep writing them. I think everybody should keep writing those Miami's going to fail pieces. But because I can only imagine being fuel for the people of Miami who desperately want to see their team, see their city get an MLS team. Show up no matter what. Hopefully Beckham runs this team in a proper way, in an effective way. Hopefully tickets are reasonable. Hopefully there's ample transportation and or parking at this imagined stadium. If all of those things are true, there's no excuses. There are no excuses. Brian on Twitter says the ownership question, he doesn't think it matters. Do what feels good. So there's one Brian telling another Brian, don't worry about it. Francisco on Twitter, ask Red Bull fans, do they cheer for the Red Bulls or Metro? Fan base still cheers for Metro stars, not Red Bulls. There's a legacy there. You can sort of imagine your team has not become the corporate animal that the New York Red Bulls are, I suppose, right? You're supporting that history. You're going all the way back. And even if you're a new Red Bulls fan, you're not supporting the company, the Red Bulls. You're supporting the guys who wear the shirt. Supporting the guys who represent you on the field. And I think that that's going to have to be. This is why Man City has to do a good job of separating themselves or separating the New York City brand from the Man City brand, in my opinion. And there's news out that we're going to potentially get the logo in early March. So I'm looking forward to that. May or may not have been delays on that front. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk to Musa Okwonga about what went wrong for Manchester United in Greece yesterday. 2-0 they lose to Olympiacos, a deficit they now have to take back to Old Trafford. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Stay right there.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
And joined now via Skype by our friend Musa Okwonga, who comes on to talk about Manchester United with us apparently whenever bad things happen, because that just seems to be the way things go. First of all, Musa, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Very well. How are you?
That's good to know, because I don't know that your club is doing quite as well. And I think I'll start. We'll obviously get to yesterday's events in short order, but I have to comment on the fact that Twitter is sort of abuzz with the notion that David Moyes is under fire, that he's the bookie's favorite to be the next manager sacked. What do you make of that?
I think that's as much a product of social media as anything else, because I think people would have thought these things in previous times, but they wouldn't have been. I do think that social media is responsible for a lot of collective hysteria and drum banging, but there's also legitimate room for complaint. But I think the social media has accelerated this conversation perhaps by several more months than it would have otherwise.
Well, certainly we know that bookies will set odds in order to get action. It's not necessarily that they believe he's going to be fired. It's that they're trying to drive as many bets as possible. And because of social media, because of the furor around David Moyes and his team, and after yesterday's events, you sort of make this logical leap to the notion that he may be fired. Now, does he deserve to be fired, I suppose, after what happened yesterday against Olympiacos?
Not strictly after what was being done, after what happened yesterday. A lot of people have said that was the worst performance by Manchester United this season, but I thought it was actually unfair to Olympiacos because they haven't lost in the league this season. They've only lost, I think, to Paris Saint-Germain this year. They finished ahead of Benfica in their qualifying group. So, almost to say that it's their worst performance this season, to lose 2-0 to a team in front of a very good home crowd with a very good record this year is actually a little bit disrespectful to Olympiacos. I actually thought the result against Newcastle was far worse, the 1-0 defeat at Old Trafford, because United there were completely devoid of any kind of attacking creativity, to the extent that I think Hernandez only received the ball once from midfield the entire match. That was a far worse performance than this one, in my opinion.
Now, this European success, or at least, proceeding in Europe, proceeding in the Champions League, had been Moyes' failsafe to a certain extent. The league has been a problem. That seventh place is not great, but hey, look, we're still proceeding well in Europe, and now that may be gone. Now, not that United can't overturn a 2-goal deficit at home against Olympiacos, but they've not made it easy for themselves.
No, absolutely not. And the thing is, the problem with the Olympics being seen as the European Champions League being seen as a failsafe was that the team that United beat most convincingly, Bayer Leverkusen, have shown themselves to be very poor in Europe. So, for example, they got beaten on the first leg with Paris Saint-Germain, so they actually weren't that good a side. And unfortunately for David Moyes, that was his only sort of truly convincing performance of the season against Leverkusen. So, many people have been floating the theory that actually it's better that United don't go through, because the next round they might be absolutely crushed by one of the big guns in Europe, which really would be a final evisceration we don't want to see.
Okay, well, so would it would be worse to advance and be eviscerated than to fall out of Europe now and sort of redouble the efforts in the league? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I personally would rather they just went through and then you find your luck in the next round.
Right.
I think the year that Chelsea won, they had a really tough first leg against Napoli and came back. I'm not saying United will do that. I'm not saying they'll win, to be honest. I'm not saying they'll get through this round, but it's always good to see them make progress. Whether Moyes will make progress with the team remains to be seen.
Now, you said that you thought it was unfair on Olympiacos to paint this as the worst United performance perhaps ever, and hyperbole is the theme of the day, and certainly pundit after pundit was making that comment. Lack of fight, lack of energy, just didn't have the will to go out there and win. And to me, that's an easy thing to say.
The Newcastle performance was actually worse. The Newcastle, I don't know where this has come from, the worst performance of the season. Like, the Newcastle performance is utterly abject. The last 20 minutes of that game, United put up no fight at all. There were no attempts on goal. Wilfried Zaha came on at left wing, looked completely miserable and out of place and unhappy being there. Had just been thrown on, I think, for the first time that season to rescue a game that was long beyond them. Cabaye was lording around midfield and adding millions of pounds to his transfer price every minute because he was looking like Zidane against that midfield. Tom Cleverley was endlessly passing the ball sideways if it was some kind of anti-gravitational pull at the halfway line. And the entire play was characterised by dumb terror.
Yeah.
Because being at Old Trafford in front of a crowd that has seen years of success and all of a sudden serving up mediocrity is a pretty miserable thing to be doing. And unfortunately, poor Tom Cleverley, has played so poorly in recent months that it almost feels cruel to comment on it. I was writing the match reaction yesterday for ESPN, and it actually felt unpleasant to have to criticize Cleverley again, because you clearly see when Cleverley receives the ball and passes it on, he is not initiating or orchestrating play. He's merely continuing what's been given before. He just doesn't have the creative. This is the thing. It's almost unfair. It's like giving an art student a paintbrush and saying, "Be Picasso."
Right. It's to that point. While we are critical of player performances, as we should be, it all reflects back on Moyes, and that is both fair and unfair at the same time. Fair in that he needed to do a better job of putting together a team that achieves the United standard, but it's also not in his power to make Robin van Persie put away a chance he does 9 times out of 10.
Yes, but a chance he only received 9 minutes from the end of the match because the team wasn't creating anything. This is the thing about that game. United put so much stock, I mentioned in my reaction for ESPN, they put so much stock in crossing the ball, but they don't appear to be practicing crossing. There's a strange moment about 25 minutes in when Antonio Valencia gets the ball on the right flank, cuts past his man and crosses the ball in and slices it high and wide. And you think to yourself, Luis Figo would have bent that ball back in every single time. What's going on? There's just a catastrophic failure of confidence, because I honestly believe, and I have no evidence of this, but I honestly believe there are people in that dressing room who think he doesn't have the tactical chops to take us where we need to go.
Which again, based on the results so far, is probably a fair assessment. I mean, there are so many different layers to this. We've talked through many of them. It's both Moyes and his carriage. It's perhaps his tactical acumen, which would fit a team with lesser talent, lesser ability. Although, again, whether or not the United players are good enough is a serious question at this point. And this result follows Wayne Rooney's contract extension and all of these sort of extraneous stories.
The contract extension was extraordinary. I said this before, and a lot of people have disagreed with me, and that's fine. But my view on it was simply this: you're paying £300,000 a week to a player who may be past his best. It's arguable he's past his best. If he's not past his best, you then want him to reinvent his game.
Sure.
But to me, this is almost looking like the Albert Pujols contract. To me, in terms of the size of it and what he's expected to perform, and you look at Pujols' numbers and the drop in reduction, and the difference is Pujols actually is diligent. He has the work ethic that you think this guy could turn it around, in a year's time. He may not get back to that level that he was at before, the otherworldly level, but at least he's going to turn it around. There's no such evidence with Rooney. And my argument was this: you're paying the guy £300,000 a week. For that money, you could get possibly 3, maybe even 4 players who are really hungry. Let's look at Dortmund, for example. Yeah. Dortmund are selling Lewandowski. Who have they got? They've got a guy, Aubameyang, the Gabon international. They've got Mkhitaryan. Do you know what I mean? When they sold Kagawa. The players are out there. For one Wayne Rooney, you could buy 3 fantastic attacking midfielders from, let's say Shakhtar Donetsk, for example, who would boost the squad and allow the team a greater diversity of talent. Unfortunately, they've gone for the terrified option. They've kowtowed to Rooney's demands, and I think that contract is going to look really, really bad 2 or 3 years from now.
Well, you invoke Albert Pujols, but Albert Pujols got that massive contract because he was so dominant in St. Louis, while Wayne Rooney, not that he has been bad, I'm not saying he has been, but he clearly hasn't been the best player in United squad the last couple of years. And it's almost like this is a delayed reaction to what Wayne Rooney used to be for United.
Oh, well, I don't know. I think the reason that Rooney hasn't been the best player in the squad is because he has actually facilitated the improvement of so many players around him.
Okay.
I think he does have that quality. So, for example, Cristiano Ronaldo's peak unfortunately coincided with Rooney's emergence, and Rooney, I think, was forced to carry water a lot of the time for Ronaldo. In the Champions League, you saw it a lot. Rooney often played on the left side and the right side behind Ronaldo, not really as the out and out, and never really had the chance to be the main man. And in his career, he's been dogged by that a lot. I do think the contract is overpriced, and I do think it shows, unfortunately, unlike a lot of the other transfer business that has happened since Moyes arrived at the club, it showed a lack of imagination. It's a lack of bravery.
Does it seem to you like a business decision rather than a football decision?
Well, yes, and they all do, because this is the problem. The people running the club are not football people. Ed Woodward is not a football man. The Glazers are not football people. And the real problem actually with Moyes is that Moyes is a reactive manager, both in the transfer market and on the pitch. So, for example, Tactically he's reactive, which is why he's counter-attacking and he's cautious. And off the pitch, he acquires Juan Mata, but Juan Mata wasn't part of a predefined strategy. He was there because he was available. He's a great player, but it wasn't as if he drew up some pre-existing strategy with the director of football and said, we're going to buy these players. They took a player who was available, which was great, but it does fit into the pattern of Moyes reacting rather than imposing his strategy on the market. Fellaini can be seen in the same context, and frankly, actually, one of the reasons that Moyes is being judged because his players aren't good enough, but he has had the opportunity. Moyes has been allowed to spend £70 million since he took over. That is a lot of money.
Yes.
£70 million in a market where Christian Eriksen of Ajax was available for 12. There comes a point where you have to start saying, the guy is culpable. Because 70 million, there's a lot of managers looking at what Moyes has received. I mean, look at Tony Pulis at Crystal Palace. Imagine if Tony Pulis was given £70 million to improve Crystal Palace. This is a guy who's come into the club, Tony Pulis, when Crystal Palace were bottom. It now looks as if they might not be relegated. You know what I mean? The worst thing for Moyes is there are other managers coaching their teams extremely well on far fewer resources.
I suppose
this is now his challenge.
I suppose that one of the troubling aspects of this, and I have a tweet here, as a stockholder and fan, Manchester United is bumming me out this year. It's hard to even watch matches. He says bench Moyes for two matches, but he mentions the stockholder element. I mean, the troubling part of this is that it's already looking like decisions are made and football aspects are affected by whether or not the stock price is going to go up or down.
Well, yeah, I mean, but this is the thing about football. Like, if you take care, it's like any product. It couldn't just be football. Imagine like, a film franchise. Make the content good and it will sell. Right. The reason the Star Wars was a terrible, in fact, we always draw the analogy in an article between Star Wars under Lucas and Star Wars under, the next director is, if the content is terrible, people will not come. If the content is good, everyone will come. And this is the problem with United. We're like Star Wars after George Lucas. It's such a cash cow that we've got complacent about the content we're producing in front of people. How can a sponsor look at United now and say this is a viable multi-year proposition?
It's an interesting point. It's a very good point. Is coasting on the brand is, so sorry for that word. Nobody likes that word brand, but they've started to treat themselves in that context, and you have to in a modern world. But there is obviously a line between that and putting out the quality on the field. Musa, let me ask you. Go ahead.
Look at Liverpool. Liverpool, same example. Liverpool are a brand, but look how they've been run in the last couple of years. After obviously after the Suarez incident was pretty ugly, but they've really turned things around in the last year with Rodgers coming there. It's really had a big improvement. They're running as a brand, but they understand that football comes first.
And I think that's a function of and a credit to the owners that they have now. I mean, there's obviously people like to paint with a broad brush, not only American owners but foreign owners in the Premier League. It's an individual case-by-case situation. You can't assume.
And that's lazy. But that's lazy of them to do because the Boston Red Sox owners, I remember when they appointed Epstein. It's the first that came to my attention, and I thought it was a really progressive hire. And they're brave owners, and I think that it's very easy to kind of write off foreign owners for that reason.
The question I have for you at this point, based on the likelihood that the Champions League campaign is going to end. I mean, at some point, this is not a team that's going to go on and win the Champions League.
No, it's really not.
And the league is where it is at the moment. Would you prefer, and I don't know, it's difficult for any fan to ever say, I want my team to lose a certain amount, unless you're an NBA fan and you're looking for that lottery pick.
Thank you. Yeah.
Would you prefer United to get a Europa League spot or to maybe just finish out?
I think you've got to always wish the best for your team, to be honest.
Okay, fair enough.
I tell you why I say that, because other clubs will be looking, other players will be looking. Maybe they're considering United in the summer, but they think, and we don't know. We don't know how many clubs, we don't know how many players are out there who are still considering coming to United. The money's going to be really good. They're rebuilding. They've got cash available. This is how players think. It's the same in the NBA as well. But they're just looking for an indication of, is their fight in the teammates, is the dressing room a happy place? And if they just see a bit of an upturn in the last few games this season, and a team that's really going for it, they might be tipped and think, well, you know what, I'm not going to go to Wolfsburg or Roma or Juventus or wherever else is offering me money. I'll just give United a go. So I want them to show some fight, just because you never quite know. And also, there's a lot of players that love playing in the Europa League, because it's European competition. Sure. Chelsea won the Europa League last year. Arguably, it was a great springboard for some of their success this season.
It's interesting because you can imagine the possibility that United, at least their on-field product, the quality of their team sort of takes that step down, and because of that, it's not beyond United to be a Champions League winner in the next year or two. I mean, I think they're capable of that if everything went right. But you can imagine them sort of pulling a Liverpool, and we may have talked about this before, and having to spend a couple of years building back up to their old level. I
think it could be worse.
Okay,
I think it could be an Inter Milan.
Wow.
And I draw an Inter Milan comparison. It could be a club. If you consider what Inter Milan are, Liverpool don't have a brilliant club on their doorstep. They've never had that. Everton have never dominated. They haven't had it in the shadow. United have a bigger problem that they have a very good infrastructure right opposite them in Manchester City, a highly professional management, one of the best sports management teams in world football, Soriano and Begiristain. That is a very profound concern for them, because Inter Milan, as we know, were racked by chronic instability for decades, didn't win the Champions League for 30 years, and didn't win the league for about 20 odd years. And that is actually United's predicament. It's far worse than what Liverpool had to endure, because at least they haven't had Everton looking across Stanley Park going, you guys are terrible, look at us. They haven't got the contrast.
Very odd thing to consider. United fading into the background while Manchester City dominates. That would be very strange.
but entirely possible.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, I mean, a function of where modern, I mean, however you feel about the modern game, there's no stopping the trends and the way things are dealt with in the business elements of it. And for better or worse, City is going to have more money than United, for at least more money that they're willing to spend for how many years until the Glazers
for the foreseeable future. Yeah. For the foreseeable future. Yeah. And this is the thing, you can challenge, but you've got to be really smart about it. And, as we know, if we look at the business world, people hate the analogies, but I think they're valid here. If you don't get the succession right, you can be screwed. The reason General Electric did fine is because Jack Welch, despite being, an autocratic leader, Jack Welch had the wisdom to carefully promote his successor. Mm-hmm. And you look at continuity. I mean, Apple, for example, they brought in Tim Cook. Tim Cook had a tough time after Steve Jobs, obviously, who wouldn't? But Tim Cook has turned it around and is doing a decent and creditable job. Man. So, the succession is absolutely vital to get it right. And unfortunately, Ferguson, in my opinion, it was the last great act of it was imperial hubris.
Yes.
The hire of David Moyes. It was almost like, appointing a successor, a bit like the Pope granting indulgences.
Yeah, it is not working out to this point, and who knows what the long range effects. And I apologize for bumming out any United fans, and I'm sure Musa does as well. But hey,
sometimes a clarity can be cathartic.
It can.
So that's my approach anyway.
All right. So Musa Okwonga, follow him on Twitter. OKWONGA. Excuse me. Writing on Manchester United at ESPNFC as well. Thank you for your time, Musa. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care. Have a nice one. Bye.
This has been a fantastic Wednesday program. Here at Soccer Morning, we've had Charlie Boehm, we've had Erik Stover with some Cosmos and NASL talk, and fascinating discussion with Musa Okwonga, as it always is. Definitely follow Musa on Twitter. He's well beyond just football, but just soccer. But it's definitely a worthwhile follow. We've got a couple of minutes left here. How do you want to spend the last 5 minutes of the show? Anybody? You want to talk about Scotland's new kits? Have you seen those things? I like them. I'm gonna be on the record and say I like them because they're not boring. They're different. I'm looking at all of this. MLS is getting ready to do their second annual Jersey Week, when all of the new jerseys, whether they be thirds or whatever, are going to be coming out, be unveiled for the public. And I see some of these, and I look and I go, there's nothing interesting about that. Now, I know you want to have a look that follows you year to year, and colors are important. It's just, and maybe this is a function of the Adidas contract, and nothing against Adidas. I like Adidas, but they don't get real exciting with these MLS kits. And then you see Scotland, and this is like remember the Barcelona Tequila Sunrise kits? Remember those? They still wear those? I don't even know. I don't watch enough Barcelona. I think they probably still wear them. This is like that, only it's bars of pink and yellow. It's fantastic. And it just, the best part about it is that when you look at them, you don't think Scotland. Maybe that's bad, but I like it. I'm enjoying the responses too, which, look, it is fair game to make as many jokes as you want about Scotland's new kits. Please do. Please do. I don't know that there are any really good ones out there. I'd love to hear your jokes. Give me your best Scotland kit jokes. today, Champions League resumes, or there is more Champions League, rather. Galatasaray and Chelsea. The thing that's troubling about this is reports a couple of Chelsea fans were stabbed in Turkey, which, look, come on. Let's stop with this nonsense. Fan violence is such a scourge on this sport. And I know it's easy for me sitting here in the United States where this is not really an issue, at least not in soccer, and sort of cast stones out into Turkey. Look, we have had enough of this. This is only going to hurt the game. Now, again, not much of it in soccer in the United States, but let's not pretend there's not fan violence. The two guys that the two Dodger fans that beat up the Giants fan were the other way around. I think two Dodgers fans who beat up the Giants fan in L.A. were just sentenced for their role in sending that guy into a coma and eventually, brain damage, the whole thing. Violence in general. What can we do without that? Jason on Twitter just sent me Japan's 2014 World Cup kits. Now, Scotland, they've got new kits. They're not going to be in the World Cup. Japan's going to be in the World Cup. These things are highlighter yellow. Yeah. This is the away shirt. It's very Seattle Sounders-esque. Not quite. Some weird orange paint streak across the shoulders and the back. Interesting. I like it. Why not? Be different. Be different. I'm the guy that liked the Where's Waldo kit for the U.S. Why I'm troubled by the home kit for the World Cup that is a boring polo-like. There's nothing to it. What is it? What is it supposed to evoke? Now, generally speaking, these things don't matter to me. I'm not the kit hunter guy. I'm not out there looking for the release. But if that is the U.S. World Cup, I'll be disappointed briefly before I care more about what they're doing on the field. But come on. Mix it up a little bit. Be different. Apparently Adidas is with Japan. And again, that's whatever you want to say about the Sounders and their colors and the what is it? What's that color that they used on their third kit, whatever it was? I don't know. Something electric, something. I don't know. Electricity, was that the name of the shirt? Whatever you want to say about it. At least it was interesting. At least it was different. Give me chaos. Give me interesting. Give me bright colors. Let's go back to the 90s. I just wrote a piece for Sneaker Report on Umbro shorts in the 90s. You can go find it, by the way. Those things came in some crazy colors. And it was ugly. I'm not saying any of this stuff is attractive. That's just interesting. I'd rather have interesting over stylish. You're not trying to win any fashion awards when you go out there and kick the ball around and try to score goals. You're just trying to look interesting. I don't know. Well, you're not trying to do that. You're trying to win the game. But who cares? Who cares? The only thing I don't like, the only thing I can't get on board with are the kits like in Mexico where there's 1,000 ads all over on the club kits. There's 1,000 ads on the club kits. That's just a little too much for me. I can handle, a shirt sponsor. I can even handle the old school MLS with the Sierra Mist across the back. Remember that? Just don't overdo the sponsors. Now, obviously, we don't have to worry about that with internationals. So we get a clean shirt in this bright yellow for Japan. What is the U.S. going to wear? White. I'm not even going to address that superhero thing, which is probably nonsense. Raph on Twitter would love to see a team do teal or pink. Miami, where are you? Why aren't you doing pink or teal? Please tell me that's happening. Philip on Twitter, you're forgetting sales of shirts matter to teams, and most people don't want to wear garish shirts. That's true. There are business concerns I am not appreciating, and I apologize. But I just from my personal, selfish perspective, be interesting. Be interesting. That's all I ask. Speaking of interesting, thank you to Charlie Boehm. Thank you to Erik Stover. Thank you to Musa Okwonga. Fantastic show today. We'll be back tomorrow with a Thursday edition. The Chelsea Galatasaray game and Schalke Real Madrid, which I didn't even mention. Madrid, big favorites in Germany. We'll see how Schalke handles that. Thanks a lot for listening. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. See ya.
on the boulevard, I lended. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was I, the abstract. And me, the